bring up Karen Lefkowitz, who's the Vice President of Business Transformation at PEPCO Holdings. She's responsible for the planning, design, and implementation of their entire advanced metering infrastructure program. She's had a number of important positions there at PEPCO, including Director of System Operations and the Director of Customer Relations. So she's really seen all aspects or all sides of the business. Her MBA is from Marymount University. So Karen, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about who PHI is, why we decided to embark on this journey, what we ended up building, and some of the challenges we had to overcome. As you can see by the color indicators on this slide, while we're headquartered in Washington, D.C. and are responsible for the close-in Maryland suburbs of D.C., we are also responsible for Atlantic City Electric, the southern part of New Jersey, as well as Delaware, and the yellow indicates that in Delaware we're surrounded quite a bit by a number of munis and co-ops. We have just under 2 million customers in total, and we do have a small gas business in Delaware. So this slide, or something quite like it, I'm sure everybody who's considered AMI has looked at. And when we use this internally, we're typically using it to describe the complexity of the integration of all the technology that we're doing. But one thing that started jumping out to us a couple of years ago is the extent to which we are now going to be operationally reliant on a very robust and well-performing communications infrastructure, and that was very new. So while we always paid attention to the communications infrastructure for the T&D organization, and certainly we depended on it for our corporate systems operations, that now they were going to interact in a way that they'd previously not done, and that really caused us to revisit the entire notion of a decentralized monitoring approach. So I suspect this looks like most other companies. We had historically monitored from various points our telecommunication networks. So we had a couple of monitoring locations in corporate IT. We had at least a couple in power delivery, and clearly we had a lot of overlap in that. So one of the things that we wanted to do when we integrated these things was to remove some of that overlap. So while there were a lot of technical challenges, most of which we overcame, there was no question that the largest challenges that we had were around the people. So there were a couple of questions about that, and I'll see if I can go into that. When we first started this and we started talking about it to the various organizations, one thing that really resonated inside the power delivery organization on the OT side was the idea of providing an analogy to system operations. So today, electric system operations monitors and provides first response and does control to some extent on the electric system. And people in power delivery were pretty comfortable with that analogy. So system operations doesn't own the substation or the transformer or the tap changers, but they're going to monitor them, they're going to dispatch first responders, and they're going to operate them. The IT organization doesn't really have an analog for that. So the IT organization has owned and operated all of their equipment as well as monitoring it over the years. And so we found that to be a little more challenging. People were very resistant. You know, in some level, people are resistant to change because they're worried about job security. That's an easy thing to dispel in our approach because we weren't getting rid of any people in the various organizations. We were just centralizing the monitoring of it. So once we got sort of the vision out there, then it was a question of actually integrating the communications devices themselves. We approached them and we divided the work up into 3 phases. We have completed, for the most part, everything in these 3 phases. We wanted to get our AMI system and the relay points and access points integrated. We wanted to get all of our T&D infrastructure integrated, and we wanted to get our corporate IT systems integrated to the extent they touched on any of the smart grid work. So we looked at all of our drivers. Very compelling story. We have been saying for many years, because we are the result of the merger of Atlantic City Electric, Delmarva Power and Light, and PEPCO into one company, that we wanted one company, one process, one system. So we extended that to this project as well. We wanted to monitor all of the planned network elements. That wasn't possible with the way we were approaching it. We had this new AMI stuff going in that was going to have an impact on how we manage the electric system. We see a future where some pieces of what traditionally has been centralized SCADA control will be decentralized, and the largest example for that is distribution automation. And we also felt a real need to decrease the downtime and the root cause correlation of whatever equipment failures or outages that we had. In general, what we see are customers' expectations are going up. And that's true not only of our end customer, who's the consumer of electricity, but also internally, our organizations want to have a shorter time to get information about root cause analysis. We also see that as the integration of the smart grid and the IT organization, so the OT and the IT integration starts happening more and more, there's also going to be an integration in the traditional system operator's role and the NOC operator's role. And so that really drove us to co-locate the NOC operator with the system operations organization. And they report up through the same leadership structure, starting with the director of system operations. We think that over the long run, we might see, and I really don't have a time frame for this, but you might see these people actually sitting on consoles side by side. Right now, they're in two separate rooms with glass wall in between them. And there are lots of benefits that we can see in the short run as well as the long run. We would immediately be able to see network performance visibility across the entire network. We have now got 2 high availability centers that operate the NOC, and we think we've got a platform that's going to enable support of all the legacy equipment. So I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about what we actually built. You know, we spent a fair amount of time talking about whether or not we wanted to have a primary and a backup, a hot standby center. Ultimately, because we see the potential integration of system operations and network operations in the future, we decided to have 2 fully operating NOCs. So they're simultaneously operating in our northern territory and our southern territory. We would expect ultimately all of these to be 24-hour-a-day operations. We are limiting one of the centers to daytime only, and the other will have 24/7 operations. They all can see what each other can see, so there's no limitation in their visibility across the 2 physical locations. As you can see, we tried to outfit this with all of the equipment that they would need and designed things so that operators could move between the 2 centers without loss of an understanding about how the equipment is laid out or the systems that they're using. So when we went about staffing the organization, we were unsure whether or not we were going to have people internally in the company interested in these jobs. And as it turned out, as I suspect many companies, the folks that can do this work are pretty much in high demand all over. We ended up staffing almost entirely from outside the company and established a shift supervisor in each of the 2 locations, and NOC engineer who is available to support the entire organization. We ended up hiring 2 people to work inside our IT organization whose only responsibility is to work on the NOC. So we have a great opportunity right there to start bridging some of the gaps between IT and OT. And of course, we hired a group of people as network operators. In our case, a number of our network operators had already had jobs in other industries doing network operations, just not in the utility space. So most of them came in with the ability to start working right away. In fact, if anything, they felt we were constraining them because we wanted to make sure that we very, very deliberately did change management internally in the company, that everybody felt comfortable with the decisions that we were making, that everybody understood the different roles that the NOC operator had versus the traditional jobs inside power delivery engineering, telecom engineering, and our corporate IT group. We also see there is potential overlap in our compliance organization around system operations. So we're structured so that we can fill that gap if we determine that there is one. So we want to talk a little bit about people, process, and technology, and perhaps a few more words about the challenges that we had. So right away, we had to hire people, we had to train them, we had to define the roles and responsibilities of the staff, and we had to be able to recruit and hire skilled resources. I don't know about the rest of you, but the hiring process is always far too long. And so we needed to be able to build a training program and hire people and sort of be able to iterate that repeatedly as new people got hired on. We also recognized when it comes to process and procedures that we always had to be very mindful about NERC compliance, and while we don't believe anything we're doing falls under NERC's purview, we did feel like we wanted to make sure that everything we build would be compliant if, in fact, it ever does fall under their jurisdiction. And so we had to pay a lot of attention to that, and those of you who have spent any time with the NERC standards, you know that can be very time-consuming. The other very important criteria was to establish a governance process. You know, I think that we were a little slow moving forward because we didn't have, at a very high level, senior leadership from the various organizations well aligned with what we were doing and visibly supportive. And as soon as we put a governance process in place that included what we called a sponsorship meeting that had our CIO and our senior leaders in asset management and telecom engineering and system operations all in the room reviewing the progress, we started to see some shift in some resistance by people within the IT and the OT organizations to what we were doing. One of the things that I can't overemphasize is while we did have a lot of challenges, the actual process of working through those challenges with people and the change management issues, I believe very strongly has ended up with us being in a much better place moving forward. So there are no unknowns about what the stumbling blocks were. So once we confronted people, like, why are you resisting this? What are the concerns that you had? By openly working through all of that, we now have a lot of people in the organization that are active supporters. And that's very important because we feel like we've taken the first step here in our INOC, but there is tremendous potential. We're moving slow. We like to say, you know, crawl, walk, run. We're just at the walking stage. We've come out of the crawl stage, but we think there's a lot of upside that we can run with in the future. So we think that we're going to end up with a much better correlation and root cause analysis coming out of this with the technology that we've established. We're going to be able to leverage really good policies and process and procedures that our IT folks had historically, as well as really good, timely responsiveness from the power delivery telecom side. So we're taking the best practices from both sides of the organization and merging them on. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is there is an opportunity to have visualization tools applied on the power delivery side, which historically we've not had. So we see a real opportunity in that coming up in the future. And while we've done some integration of our IT and OT systems, we see opportunities to improve that and to add to that in the future. Right now we're working on completing all of the technology integration that we set up for this first phase of our INOC, but we expect to be adding more to that over time.
Well, congratulations, Karen. That sounds like you've got a great start on things.